Hello, and welcome back to the Nourish with Purpose podcast. It's Bailey, and I hope you're having a great Wednesday or whenever you're listening to today's episode. If you're somebody who falls asleep to the sound of static, the little sound machine, then you're going to love today's episode because, like usual, my computer's about to die, and we're just rolling with it. It makes this horrible sound every time I turn it on, and it sounds a little staticky. So if that's what you hear, I'm so sorry. Please don't fall asleep at the wheel if that is what you use to fall asleep at night. I personally could never, but I know that some people do. Either that, or let's just imagine it's the sound of waves crashing behind us. Oh my gosh. Anyway, well, what a start to today's episode. Today we are talking all about hobbies, and as a chronic hobbier myself, I could not be more excited to just chat all things hobbies, how you can find a hobby, how you can really enjoy spending that time alone or that time in community. But honestly, I'm going to focus mostly on how you can spend that time alone, just because I think with a lot of hobbies, we do that to kind of escape maybe from our reality, right? Maybe it's not even an escape, but it's just a way for you to relieve stress or to find that passion that you're looking for that maybe you don't get from your job. Anyway, we're going to cover all of that and more, but I thought we should catch up first because there's some things I want to talk to you about this last week. So, as you know, we live on 3.5 acres in rural Nebraska. Right now, I got those 4 ducks, which I shared about on last week's episode, which I love. They're growing so fast. They moved outside. I have a little kiddie pool for them. They're still a little too tiny to actually be able to get in and out of the kiddie pool. So I need to set up a little ramp for them, but it's been so windy and rainy around here, so I just haven't done that yet. So their kiddie pool is filled. They also have other sources of water, but I don't have a ramp for them yet. So that's the only thing I need to do there. Otherwise, we have our 9 laying hens. But we're adding some more chickens onto our farm, by the hundreds. I shared a little bit about this on my Instagram story, but I didn't dive too much into it. But my parents and we ordered 150 little baby chicks that will be laying hens. So if you don't know, there's a difference between chickens. So laying hens are the ones that produce eggs. The chickens that you would eat are called broilers. So broilers do not lay eggs. Okay, so that's a very important thing to know. So with these laying hens, the laying hens we have at my house are going to go to my parents to live with their big chickens. And then we are storing 150 of them here on our farm. And I'll be taking care of them until about late September, when I'm going to try to sell 75 of them. So if you need laying hens, or if you want chickens in your backyard or on your farm, we're going to have a supply for you. And you can already claim them, just so you know, not to sales pitch you here, but we are raising laying hens. But then next Wednesday, we are getting our broilers. So if you remember last year, I did talk about this a little bit on the podcast. We also raise broilers. So I believe we're getting 120 of them. I'm not quite sure the total amount. Last time I heard, I thought it was in that range, but we have little huts and we'll keep half in one, half in another, and then we're just testing different feeds to see which ones plump up the fastest. So with that feed, it's part of this grant that we're doing, but we get those this next Wednesday. So we're going to have 150 laying hens, 120-ish broilers, and then we've got our 4 ducks. Things are going to get a little bit crazy. That's why I think I'm trying to really embrace maybe this not slower season, because my job wise is not really slow. I'm kind of at capacity with a lot of things, and that definitely goes in phases, but it's not taking as much of my time than it has previously, just because I'm getting comfortable with what I do day to day. I kind of have a routine and a schedule. So I'm really trying to embrace these other opportunities that I have to be outside and enjoy the good weather, the sunshine, take care of these chickens and our ducks. And then I also started planting my garden. So I did my first round of everything, and then on May 6th, that is 2 weeks after I intended last frost, and I always like to give a little wiggle room. I would never go right after the last frost just because I want to make sure I do it plenty late so that I'm not stressing about things freezing and dying. So with that, there's just a lot going on, and I really have always said I love my chickens. I wish that I could have like mass quantities of laying hens just because it brings me so much joy. And I just think it's really cool for that to be one of the hobbies that I have, and to have the opportunity to do so many different things with it, right? Like, yes, we have laying hens and I take care of them every day, but outside of that, like now raising baby chicks, like it's just a fun opportunity and I love it. I have so much fun with it. And just with spring, the spring season, I think it's just a very fitting time to like see new life and watch it grow. Something about that just feels very comforting to me. And so that's kind of the biggest update that I have on that front. So we also have 2 pregnant cats, so we're going to have baby kitties here soon. I really am excited for that. I'm not really a cat person, but having those little guys around our farm is just going to be so fun and so precious this summer. And I feel like Luna's going to just love them. Luna is our dog, if you don't know. So that is just what's going on. Again, lots of new life, and it's just a really fun time. I feel like there's a lot of good energy on my end, like to be outside and actually enjoy my time when I'm there, rather than stressing about maybe what I'm not doing inside or what I should be doing business-wise. And I've talked about that enough. I don't need to dive into it, but I just think I've really struggled with that in the past, is actually enjoying a hobby without stressing that I'm not working enough, when in reality, like, our hobby is meant to help us escape from work. Or like I had mentioned, to maybe just get away and explore different interests that you have. So that is kind of the biggest catch up there. Let me think. Was there anything else that I wanted to share with you? Oh yes, I do have a confession. So if you were listening to the episode 2 weeks ago about spring cleaning, I have that spring cleaning guide that I created, and I actually have listed in the description of that episode. But I have to admit that I actually personally never started my spring cleaning guide or whatever that was, and I felt like such a fraud, but my husband did. So hey, now it's at the end of tax season. He's an accountant, so he is deep cleaning our house today, actually, while I'm working and recording this episode. But I just feel like I had to be very transparent with you that I did not actually do the spring cleaning guide. I felt really guilty about that because I had a lot of good energy to get into the next week and really make that a priority. And then that was the week when I launched my group or hybrid coaching program. Not to make excuses for myself, but it just was not at the top of my priority list. And so I think that, obviously that's okay, right? There's also just has to be that understanding that, yes, even if you want to do something, even if you want to do something, that doesn't mean you're always going to have the available time or make the time to make it a priority. So I just thought I should let you know I was a little bit fraud-like. I didn't actually do it, but our house is clean, and I always do like a daily just like pick up, make sure all my clothes are put away. Having clutter just stresses me out. So it's not like my house was a pigsty for 2 weeks. I just didn't deep clean like I had intended. But outside of that, any other catch-ups that I have? Oh, I wrote some down here. I've also am growing flowers in my basement, which we all know. There is that good red glow outside the windows. If you know where I live and you drive by, that is what that is. We are growing vegetables and flowers in our basement, just in case you got suspicious. But that is something that I really think I'm going to do mass quantities of next year. I have a lot of plant starts, and I had a lot of interest in people wanting to buy them. And I honestly think they might all be accounted for already. I'll have to double check. I want to make sure that I have enough to plant, but I'm always just shocked at the interest that people have in buying plant starts. And it's something that I love to do, so I really would like to get some set up next year to do it in a larger scale. which that's going to require a little bit of an investment on my part, but I love doing it. It's a hobby that I could just bask in, and I could just do that all day long, and I would be so content and so happy. And so that was just another update I had, is just, I'm always just shocked at that. And it's like, I'm somebody too that I have a really hard time doing things on a small scale. So if I really like something, I'm probably just going to invest and go all in, even if it's not the most logical decision, which already. I'm working really hard on being very intentional this year, very intentional with my time and my money and my resources. Really big push for that this year. So I'm not trying to do anything impulsive, but I also think there has to be a point where your hobby, maybe you start to see a pattern and you're like, okay, like there's actually financial interest in this hobby. Maybe I could invest a little bit more in it and I could make it something that I monetize. And we're going to talk about that too, monetizing hobbies and when you should or shouldn't do that. Quote, right? I'm not going to tell you what you could and couldn't do or can and can't do, but I just think there becomes an added weight when you monetize a hobby. But for me, if it's something that I'm doing anyway, right? I start all my plants from seed, which is not something you ever have to do if you start a garden. Just so you know, I do that because I like to grow things and I like to see something from start to finish. That's something I'm very passionate about growing my own nutrient-dense foods, making real food-inspired recipes. Like, it all just goes hand in hand with what I do day to day in the coaching realm. This is just an added thing on top that I'm just passionate about. So I'm like, if I'm already going to be doing something, why wouldn't I do it in a way so other people could also benefit from what I'm doing and grow their own nutrient-dense foods and create their own real food-inspired recipes? Like, I was telling this to Nathan. We were on the phone because he wasn't home later yesterday evening, but we were talking on the phone and I'm like, I just feel like everything I do just goes so hand in hand and just flows together so well, because even when we think about like, okay, Bailey, you're insane. Why are you getting over 250, 300 chickens on your farm? Like, it's insane, right? But at the same time, I'm like, well, if I'm able to grow my own chickens for meat, I can sell that. Other people can enjoy a high quality, well-fed, well-taken care of animal, and that's something that is a core value. Same with laying hens. If I'm able to have eggs, like, and sell them or just give them to people, like, that's a core value. Raising produce, growing flowers, like, all of that, just, for me, it makes sense. And maybe I'm the only person that sees that, but my hobbies and my job go hand in hand, and that is very unique. I would say that's not typical. For most people, they probably have an everyday job that they work, and then their hobby is completely separate, or what they do outside of work is completely separate than their job. For me, I have a hard time finding a passion for something if it's not just like intertwined into every facet of my life. And I don't know if I'm unique in that sense or if that's bizarre, but I don't have a hobby to escape my day job. I have a hobby to support my day job. Like, to support the mission of my day job, not maybe financially, but the mission of what I'm doing. And I think that's unique, and that's not something that you have to do, and I don't know why I'm going on a long tangent about this, but I just think that's important to know, is like, you might be like me and what you do as a hobby supports what you do all day long, because it doesn't make you feel burnt out. It gives you energy. It kind of revives you to then be able to pour into your business or into whatever your occupation is and have that energy. Or maybe for you, it's a hobby that you do, again, to get out of your day job and not think about it and avoid it, maybe even, so it could look very different, which is why I think hobbies, although yes, it's a pretty simple thing, it can also be complex, because you also have to understand your motive for why you want a hobby. Okay, so it's very similar to having a negative habit. If you have a negative habit, I think it's important that you identify why, right? Are you stressed out at work, so that's causing you to sit on the couch and watch TV from the second you get home till when you go to bed because you just want to numb, you want to brain numb? Okay, we need to identify that negative habit and then decide, like, what can we do instead of sitting on the couch and doing that? And I get that's a great way to unwind, But if it's something you're doing to brain numb, then we need to identify why you need to brain numb or numb your brain, however you say it. But if you look at a hobby and you're doing it to escape your job, well, maybe financially you can't quit your job. So then understanding like having a hobby that you need to escape everything else and go do, let's make that a health supporting hobby or something that is going to really support that mental health, right? That piece is huge, especially if you don't love what you do day to day. You need something that you can dedicate time towards and that you can genuinely enjoy and just like want to surround yourself with. And I think for some people, it's really hard to find a hobby because, and I think especially for guys, maybe they have it a little bit harder to find a hobby just because the hobbies I'm going to list are very girly, probably. They don't all have to be, but I just think for guys, like if they're not working at their job, and I even noticed with my own husband, like creating the separation between work and doing things outside of work can be hard when you work from home. So it's like, okay, creating that separation, like what can they do to, again, support their mind, their body, their spirit, all of that through a hobby. And I think that is actually a lot harder. And I'm going to give you a list of ideas, not saying these are only girly ideas. If you're a guy listening, this could pertain to you as well. But I just think there is a difference in that. Even like the people that I follow on social media, like I follow a lot of creative women who have started businesses or started jewelry companies or different clothing lines. And it's just very creative and it's things I'm interested in, even though it's kind of outside of what I do as a hobby. It's inspiring, but I just don't see a lot of guys doing that, even if that's their interest. And maybe I'm just in a different realm and maybe I just don't see that. But I do think it's cool when we're able to find something that is so outside of what we do day to day, which is not like me, right? I kind of live, breathe everything that I coach. I also practice within my hobbies, but how many times am I going to say hobbies? I think you should probably keep a tally because I've already said it like 20 times. Anyway, that's besides the point. I just think it's cool when you find something that either goes hand in hand or it's completely opposite. Like there's no right or wrong here. And I just want to assure you of that. I want to take a quick break to talk about my one-on-one coaching program, Nourish to Flourish. Are you exhausted, bloated, uncomfortable in your own skin? Maybe you're stressed around food or you're working on healing your relationship with food. Whatever it is for you, this program was designed to help you reduce inflammation and heal that relationship with food. Our body and mind are so intertwined. That is why we have to look at the full picture. Nourishing our mind, body, and spirit is something that is so near and dear to my heart, as I lived with chronic pain for 2 years before I actually started taking steps to healing holistically. Now, after year 3, 4, 5, I've been living pain-free, and I truly could not imagine what my life would have looked like if I would have kept taking that Band-Aid approach. So if you're interested in getting one-on-one support, ditching the scale, stopping counting calories, learning how to build a balanced plate, then this program is for you. Lucky for you, because you're a podcast listener, you get 10% off of the program total. So just message me the word Nourish, let me know that you heard about this through the podcast, and I'll make sure that when you sign up for coaching, you get that 10% discount, and we can start that journey towards healing together. Let's nourish to flourish. Okay, so I also thought it would be fun to share a little bit more about what hobbies I've done in the past and which ones have stuck, because like I had mentioned in the beginning of this episode, I'm a chronic hobbier, meaning that I love to try a bazillion new things, see what works. I'll do something for a little bit, get tired of it, never touch it again. It's not great, but that does mean I do have a lot of experience doing different things. So I guess the hobbies that I have done in the past, I really started doing spoon ring making, and that's where you like bend spoons and then you make them into cool rings. Obviously pretty self-explanatory, but you're legit using spoons that have cool designs. And that hobby was hard. I did not have the right equipment to do it without like physically breaking a sweat every time I tried to bend a spoon. It felt so ridiculous because I just could not bend it, and then I couldn't get the ring to the right size, and it was just kind of a mess, which I still would eventually like to pick that hobby back up. But I think my problem is I see people doing something that I want to do, and then I invest and I do it, and then I realize that hobby was not meant for me, and that was definitely the case with that one. Next, wire wrapped jewelry. Again, I love this. I don't know what it is about me. I don't wear jewelry really. I wear hoops, like gold earrings. Sometimes I'll wear a necklace and then my wedding ring. I don't wear jewelry, but I have some deep desire to have a jewelry company or to like have a jewelry inspired hobby. And I just have no idea why, because I usually start that and then I realize, this maybe isn't for me. And the wire wrap jewelry was really fun, but the wire that I got was cheap. And so I knew I would never even want to give that away to somebody because it was already like, it was gold wire, but it was already like chipping when I would hammer it down to make it flat. Long story short, I just got frustrated and I haven't touched that hobby in probably 4 months. Unfortunately, I need to pick that one back up because it actually was enjoyable. And I think it allowed me to be creative, which is something that I think is harder to do in this rural area that we're living, because I can't go take a ceramics class in town, next to us or something. Like, that's just not a thing. Like, if you want to do a hobby, sometimes you do have to invest if you don't have it, like access to it locally. So unfortunately, like, I've been trying to find creative outlets and nothing has really stuck, but the ones that have would be sourdough. That is my number one hobby. It is stuck now for almost a year and a half. Yeah, almost a year and a half, which is crazy. I'm so passionate about it. I talk about it all the time. I share recipes on Instagram. Like, I really could geek out on it forever. I just made some sourdough bagels. I'm starting this new series on Instagram called Fermented Foods That Don't Suck, because I feel like there are so many benefits that come from eating fermented foods, but they just do not always taste very good and they're very kind of funky sometimes. But sourdough is fermented, which again, it's just made me so passionate about it. So I started bagels and I'm making those today. They're right now like rising. So we'll see how those turn out. I've made them in the past, but shaping them was an absolute disaster. So I'm hoping it turns out better this time, and then I'll share that recipe. But again, I could just make everything from sourdough. I could talk about it forever. I just love that hobby, and luckily it's one that's stuck and it also supports my health. Next one would be chickens, or now ducks. Something about taking care of another living creature, like animals obviously, is just such a fun and enjoyable hobby for me. I think it just, like, it's something that's depending on you, and so you have to, like, it just makes you have a love and appreciation for something outside of yourself, which I think is a very meaningful thing. And maybe I'm making it way deeper than it is, but I feel like for me, that's why that's become such a passion, is because it's just something outside of myself and outside of my family, obviously, to take care of every day. Okay, gardening and growing plants. I did that last winter. I did that this winter and this spring. Again, it's something that stuck, and I don't really know why. I guess this stuck. I do know why. I really got into food and nutrition, and I realized the stuff you're buying at the store, although yes, it's great, and I most often buy things at the store. If I could learn to preserve my own food that I grow and spend less money and have all of this bulk fruits and vegetables at my access, like, I think just that concept is really cool to me. And so, yeah, that's stuck as well. And then lastly, herbalism, which is a very new hobby of mine, but making tinctures, learning about herbs, learning how herbs can benefit your body, help with your stress response. It's a whole different realm to open up to. And I just wrapped up my herbalism class. I finished that and I took it nice and slow. Usually past me would have rushed through it, tried to learn as much in a short amount of time as possible, and then moved on. But now, especially as I'm doing that group coaching program, we're talking about each different area of inflammation, or that inflammation can stem from. And I'm giving the herbs and the supplements that you can use to actually support each system, which has just really aligned with that herbalism class, and the benefits, the various benefits, even when it comes to like hormones and blood sugar that you can actually gain from herbs is wild. And that's just something I want to continue learning about because it's still all very new to me. So out of all my hobbies, I did realize that I actually am in the majority of the hobbies, the top 3 hobbies in America. So although, yes, maybe I thought these were kind of unique, when I looked at what the top hobbies were, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not that unique. But the first hobby, with 42% of people in America practicing it, would be cooking and baking. Following that was reading, which was 37%, pets were 35%, and then from there I think it went to like video games, and then I'm not sure what else, but those were the top 3 in the United States. But I wanted to also jump into why having a hobby actually improves your health. So yes, maybe you got into a hobby because you really just wanted to do something outside of work. It actually has the opportunity to be health supporting, which I think is so cool and is something we don't always think about. So kind of starting out, having a hobby helps relieve stress. Okay, so if you have a hobby that stresses you out, then I'd recommend finding something else, because a hobby should not be stress inducing. It should be stress relieving. You also shouldn't do a hobby just to monetize it. And I think that's where I've failed in the past, is I started a hobby and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to make necklaces and rings and I'm going to sell them and make X amount of dollars doing that. And I feel like when you try to peddle your hobby or sell your hobby, it becomes a lot less enjoyable, at least as you're starting, because you're probably not going to be very good at it to begin with. So please feel assured that if you start anything, even like thinking about sourdough, I get questions all the time about sourdough. People message me like, what do you do? How do you do this? Do you have any recipes? My first loaves were hideous. And then, I feel like we have that shame. We're like, well, my first loaf is so ugly. Like, what did I do wrong? And honestly, it's maybe not that you did anything wrong. It's just that your timing was a little bit off, and that's something you need to practice. Like, there's so much that goes into a hobby. And when you try to compare it to what somebody else is doing, or you try to make money on it right away, you're probably just not actually going to appreciate or enjoy the hobby for what it is, because you're so obsessed with the money-making aspect of it. So again, having a hobby should not be stressful. If it's one that causes you stress, it's having the opposite effect on you, and maybe, I just encourage you to find something else. All right. Second is it makes you physically active in some cases. So thinking about finding new walking trails or walking dogs, or taking care of animals, gardening, or foraging for herbs, which I know that's kind of a niche one, but these activities are actually linked to longevity. So if you look at blue zones, the populations that spend more time doing low to moderate activity or physical activity, right? So they're not doing high intensity HIIT training all the time. They're just walking to the coffee shop and back multiple times a day, or they're gardening and spending a lot of time outside, or they're stretching. Those activities actually lead to longevity. So, and I'm not going to throw out exact numbers because I can't remember, but if you watch the Blue Zone documentary on Netflix, it's really fascinating because they don't just cover the food aspect, they cover the lifestyle aspect. So there was a gal who was really big into gardening, and she would garden and then she would share it with her community, and they would make meals together. And those people lived till well over 100. So centurions, I believe is what they call them. That, populations that do that, or cultures or communities that do that, have longer lifespans. And so it's not like, oh yeah, well, I work out every single day. Like, I could do a hobby that, is really intense, or really, like, not to say lazy, but like, you can do a hobby that's seated or in your kitchen, and that's totally fine. I'm not saying you have to be physically active, but even finding something that just gives you a little bit of activity, right? So going outside, finding new walking trails, like, I think that's such a fun hobby. And that's something that my family, I think for the last few summers, especially during COVID, we tried to really do, is just go to different walking trails in the area, go for long walks. And I don't know, it's a fun one. But again, it's that low to moderate activity level. And it's just really crazy when you see people who do things as a hobby that are within that kind of activity range, they're living longer. And I think that just goes to show, like, doing something that is not stress inducing physically, emotionally, mentally is always going to positively support your health. All right, next is it increases your confidence and your self-esteem. So when you get really good at something, you feel really proud of yourself. Like maybe you guys are tired of seeing every single loaf of bread that I make, posting it online. To me, like I'm proud of that and I love it. And it's a passion of mine and it sparks conversation with other people. Having a hobby that you love and that you love to share and that you're confident in, it creates community in all reality. Like, although yes, again, you're doing a hobby maybe to be independent, by sharing that confidence or sharing what you're doing, you're going to realize there's people around you that are very interested in what you're doing and they want to support you in some way, or they want to provide encouragement, and then you just feel even more confident. And I think that's a really good thing. We don't often like to talk about confidence being a good thing because it might make you look arrogant or cocky. And I just don't think that's true. Like we've almost gone so far the other way where like you compliment someone and they're like, oh boy, I don't know about that, but I guess thanks. Or, oh no, like I'm really not that good. I just am passionate about it. Like, why are we degrading ourselves and what we're good at? And I think that that's where that flip kind of needs to happen, because we shouldn't be embarrassed to show what we're working on if we're passionate about it. And as you start doing something more and more, like I've said in the beginning, you're going to get better at it and it's going to become something that you just feel excited to share with other people. But just know you might not be good at it right away, regardless of what it is, and that's okay. I think, kind of like leaning into that uncomfortable feeling of not being good at something is actually, in a weird way, comforting, right? Like you recognize, okay, I'm not very good at this, but that doesn't mean you just like throw in the towel and you give up. There's something about having that the resilience and that grit to keep trying and keep doing it that I think a lot of that pride comes from. And I think that's a really cool thing to see in other people. I also just think it's so inspiring when I see people doing something that I maybe know I personally couldn't do, or that I personally am not doing, but they're finding such a joy and a passion for it. That is just the most fun thing to see. I think like a lot of florists, I feel like younger generations are getting back into like growing flowers and making bouquets. And I saw somebody recently started her own business, quit working a job and started her flower company. And I just feel like truly having that amount of confidence in your ability and what you're doing to take it full time. Again, not saying every hobby needs to be monetized, but they're doing something that I know I personally wouldn't ever do. I wouldn't ever quit what I'm doing to make bouquets, but for them it works and it's so inspiring, it's so creative, and you can tell they just have that joy for it. And I think when we share our hobbies with other people, we also inspire other people, which is just not that you have to always share what you're doing. I know social media can get overwhelming and you can just want to kind of like avoid it at all costs if you're in your little hobby realm. I totally get that. We have to have things for ourselves, but also think about how what you're doing now would inspire other people if they knew what you were doing. And if you shared a little bit more about that. All right. Next, it also helps you to prevent the development of bad habits. So if you think about the time that you're spending doing your hobby, it's probably something that's supporting your health, right? Mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Whatever category it falls mostly into, it's probably a good way or a good use of your time. It's something you enjoy doing. It makes you happy. It increases your confidence. So then on the other hand, you're not spending that time, like I'd mentioned in the previous example, sitting on the couch and numbing your brain after work. And so adding in a hobby and making that a priority, either, maybe it's every single day after work, maybe it's a couple days after work, maybe it's one time a week. Whenever you find that ability to fit it in, that is time that you're dedicating for yourself, that you're not dedicating towards a bad habit. Also, hobbies can be a great way for you to socialize or practice being alone. So I think what's so fun about hobbies is that if you're around people that are also doing the hobby you're doing. So I think of like going to an art studio and doing a ceramic making class. You're around people that are also passionate about what you are passionate about. That's a great way for you to connect with other people. You already know that you have something in common. So if you're going to go up and talk to them, you don't have to wonder like, well, what would I say? What would we talk about? Because you can already connect on that hobby. On the other hand, it allows you to get away from other people. So again, if you need that time alone, it's something you can do, and you can truly enjoy the time being alone, which I think for me was a hard thing to do at first. I think after college, I really had to develop a sense of comfort in being alone, which maybe is why people avoid hobbies, because being alone is uncomfortable and sitting in silence with their own thoughts is uncomfortable. But when you have a hobby and you learn how to actually enjoy being alone, which I'm going to share some tips kind of towards the end of the episode to do that, but you realize like there's a lot of really interesting and maybe scary and uncomfortable thoughts that come to mind while you're doing this. Lean into that again. Like, we need to stop avoiding our thoughts. And that's not to say you're going to do a hobby and you're not going to think about work, or you're not going to think about the stress that work is causing on you or family situations are causing, but you're doing something productive for yourself while those thoughts come into your mind. So it's just so much healthier than if you were to go do a self-destructing habit, like go to the bar and drink all evening and then have those thoughts come into mind, because that's just not the environment for you to thrive and for you to truly process what's happening. So the hobby is so good for you to also find that time of isolation. But what I would recommend too is whatever your hobby is, like turn off the outside stimulation. So dim the lights, light some candles, turn off your music, turn off the podcast. Listen to what's happening around you. If your hobby is something outside, like don't put in your AirPods, take them out, okay? Listen to what's happening around you. Listen to birds chirping, listen to the wind blowing, or if you live where it's warm and there's a beach, like the waves crashing. Like, it might sound cheesy, but like actually play into all of those senses, right? What can you hear? What can you see? What are you smelling? What maybe cautions should you have? Or maybe there's none and you can feel very comfortable in that space. Like, that is such an important part of your health, is also being so in tune with your senses. And I really had never thought about that until right now, of just thinking like, when you take out everything else that's overstimulating you, especially your phone and your computer, those are just so overstimulating that like, get those out of your sight, get those out of your space when you're doing your hobby, because it's probably just going to stress you out more than it's going to benefit you. Okay. So then, talking about those unique and fun ideas for hobbies, these are all very specific. And again, you don't have to do anything on this list, of course, but I hope this just kind of like inspires you, if you don't have a hobby, to find something to do to enjoy that time alone or with other people, whatever that is for you. So the first one is to find a topic that you're passionate about and take a course on it. So for me, I did an herbalism course. It was a great way for me outside of scrolling on my phone. Yes, I was still on technology, but I was learning and I was diving into a realm that was so new to me. And now I know a lot more about it. And I'm able to add practices into my family's lifestyle with herbs that support our bodies, right? A tincture that I put in our coffee every morning to support our immune system. There's just so many cool things that you can do after you dive into learning about something. And I honestly think it just like kind of leads you into the next thing. So after doing herbalism, well, now I'm like, well, maybe I want to go into like naturopathic medicine. Like, let's see what I can learn about that. And I just feel like it's a great way for you to continuously stimulate your mind and find that passion. Even if you don't feel like you have something you're that passionate about, maybe deep diving into it, it would open something else up. Okay, second, go to Pinterest on your home feed and see what catches your eye. So this is always where I see these like cute little bracelets that are super colorful and they have little flowers on them. And I'm like, I want to make that. And then that's usually when I dive into a whole nother sector of having a hobby that includes jewelry. But I just think Pinterest isn't one of those social media platforms that stresses me out. I actually leave it feeling pretty easy. Like, not easy, easygoing. I feel just calm, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's a good platform to gain inspiration. I always think if I open up my home feed and it's super colorful and there's all these cute outfits and, you know, ceramics, I think that's another thing that pops up often for me, or gardening tips and tricks. Like, it just allows me to explore a hobby if I'm feeling maybe a little bit more lazy and I don't want to actually like get up and physically go do a hobby. It's a way for me to disconnect while also still being connected into what I'm passionate about. Number 3, spend time at your local community garden or start your own garden. Getting outside has been such a huge blessing for my mental and physical health and spiritual health, honestly. It's something that I could really just do forever and ever and never get tired of. And for you, maybe that thought of doing that is like stressful, sounds terrible, but I know there's a health benefit that comes when you're touching plants, like physically touching plants or working in soil. Like your body was kind of meant to do that. We think like the new normal is typing on a computer and doing research and whatever else. But if we look ancestrally, our ancestors were probably working outside, being physically active, digging in the soil, growing their own food. And if that's something that feels very aligned with you, I think that's a great way for you to take action if you don't live in a location where you could have a garden, is to spend time at your local community garden and see how you can kind of plug into that area. Number 4 is to plan to hike a trail in, your county, in your state. Maybe you have a lot of hiking trails around you or walking trails. Pick one new one a week to just go to and explore and check out. And it's a great way for you to get physically active, take friends with you, go by yourself, whatever that looks like. I think that's a really fun one. Number 5 is to get a job that includes something you love. So I get this isn't necessarily a hobby if it's a job, but I'm talking like an ultra low stress job, a job that is within a realm that you have a passion for, but you would never want to do full time. So for me, that's working at a coffee shop. I do that on Fridays and Saturdays. Not because I necessarily need to, but because I really, really want to. Like, I love it. I love being, making coffees. I love being around coffee. I love learning more about it. It's something that I started doing when we lived in Omaha, and then I got a job when we moved here to Henderson to do that as well. And I work at a small coffee shop. We're only open, it's kind of a bakery. We're only open Fridays and Saturdays. Again, I'm passionate about that. Like, I think it's so fun. And even though it's a job, like, I would show up even if I wasn't getting paid. And that's the type of thing I'm talking about. It's nothing like what I do day to day for work. It's pretty removed from that. And I still love to do it. And I think that's where there's maybe a fine line between a job and a hobby. Because if you really enjoy your job, it's hard not to see it as a hobby. So that's one, don't get too... I don't know. Find something that you love that is just not going to cause you stress. Don't put too much pressure on yourself to have that financial gain from whatever it is that you want to do part-time. Okay, number 6 is to ask yourself the question, if I had all the time and the money in the world, what would I do? Okay, so if this is travel or starting your own business or volunteering somewhere, renovating a house, whatever it is, I want you to break that big dream, right? That's kind of like at the top of your page. Like if you're journaling, you've got that big dream. Okay, it might take 10 to 20 to 50 small steps to break it down to get you to that starting point. Okay, so if your big goal is to travel to every state in the country, okay, well, we got to break that down because financially, I know I couldn't afford to travel to every state right now. So break it down and just pick one state to start with. Pick one town in that state to start with. And then do all the research in that area to know everything that you want to know about that maybe small town, what you could do when you visit that state, and then kind of map out your trail to get there. So we're doing that foundational work while you're making money at your day job, or while you are, maybe you're in school, maybe you're a student, whatever. This could look different. But until financially you're able to travel to every state in the country, do your research, get online, map out. I think it's called Road Trippers. It's one where you can map out your whole travel. And I think that is just so fun because you can put stopping points, and then you see how many miles and time to get to each place. Map that all out and get really nitty gritty about where you want to go first and just dive into what that looks like. And then eventually maybe that next step is to travel there. But again, you've got that big dream and you're breaking it down into little tiny digestible steps. All right, number 7, I believe, is to reach out to people that are doing something that you admire and set up a call with them. And this might feel really uncomfortable. It might feel really awkward, but I have people do this to me pretty often where it's like, hey, I like what you're doing. Like, could we get on a call and talk about it? And I'm always more than willing to do that, because even if you're not into holistic health, which I would assume you might kind of be if you're listening to this podcast, but if you're not even into that, like just learning the management side of having a business and navigating pricing and what to charge people, like something I definitely have not nailed down, and I never ever claim to be an expert in what I'm doing, but I've worked with a lot of other coaches, like business coaches, to develop what I have. And so I'm always more than willing to share that. And what I realize is that from every call like that, we both leave feeling more inspired than when we got on the call. So I think it's a very mutually beneficial thing. And again, that's kind of like thinking of your big dream and breaking it down into small steps, and also identifying the people that you need in your life to kind of get to that next level. Because sometimes we have to lean into other people, and we have to ask other people questions, and we have to reach out to other people. Like, it feels uncomfortable. It's not always the most maybe enjoyable part of what I do. I love connecting, but it does feel uncomfy, and sometimes you never get a response, and then you feel kind of silly. And it's just that pattern of not getting discouraged and in finding people that genuinely want to help support you and support that big dream that you have. Okay, number 8 is to stop trying to make a quick dollar and truly understand that hobbies don't need to be monetized or a way for you to make money. So yes, maybe you have something you're passionate about, maybe something comes to mind. My problem is that I will link it then, oh, if I did this amount of this, then I could make this much money from this hobby. And then I think we've kind of extracted the enjoyment from it. So if you're thinking about something right now, I don't want you to be thinking about how can I make the most money from this hobby. I want you to think about how can I dedicate the most time to this hobby. And as you continue to dedicate more time to something, you're going to get better at something. As you get better at something, it might become a really, really deep passion and desire of yours to have a business one day. So then maybe that leads to creating a business, and then you have customers and they then pay you. But we can't be starting things only for that financial gain. And for somebody like me who's honestly more money minded than I like to admit, that can be really hard, but it's almost like shutting off that part of your brain. And instead of thinking about money, we're thinking about time. How much time can I gain from this hobby, or how much time can I dedicate towards this hobby? And I think that's where that connection and that deep desire to do something will stem from. All right, I've got a few more here. I'm going to kind of quick go through them. Embroider clothing. You can do this hand stitch. You can get an embroidery machine. My mom did this when my brother went to college, and I think it was a great thing for her to do. She loves to do it. It's a great way for her to spend time. She's up on her feet. She's active. And again, it's just an enjoyable hobby. For everybody, is it going to be? Probably not. But you can start really small with this, and you can expand to get different machines or different equipment as you get better at it. Okay, next one is to start a walking or running club in your town. I did this last summer, and the interest was kind of meh. I probably won't do it again, but I could totally see if you live in a bigger city, how this could be something you could get so much interest from, especially if you work at a coffee shop or if you work at like a smaller business. I feel like you could really create like a core foundation of people that come into your business that you just mention it to, and you get them to tag along. Okay, next one, sourdough. Get a recipe book and work your way through each recipe. Again, practice with this one makes perfect. You could take classes in your area for ceramics or painting or sewing, or get on YouTube and take a Bob Ross class. My friend Isabel and I did that, I think when we were in high school or maybe freshman year of college. We just put up a YouTube video and we had like oil paintings and we painted, and we just followed a YouTube video. Like, that's a really fun thing to do. Costs very little money. You could also film videos that make you happy and share them online. Oftentimes in this episode, I said do a hobby outside of social media, but I have a really big passion for making recipe videos or making fun, visually appealing videos. And to me, that feels more like a hobby than a job. And I think if you get into something like social media, you do have to enjoy what you're recording, what you're creating, because it's a way for, yes, you to dive into that creativity, but it also can create overwhelm if you don't actually like it. So create something that's unique to you, create something that you would want to watch or you would want to maybe do, right? And dive into that area, that specific area. Don't feel like you have to do what everybody else is doing. Do your own thing, which I know can get hard. That's where you also then have to have that time to unplug and regain that sense of creativity. Because I notice on days when I'm off my phone the most, I have all these ideas that just like pop into my mind. And I'm just thinking about them. I'm like, oh, I should do that and that. And that would be a great recipe. And that would be a great video to record. And that's where I regain the sense of inspiration, is when I'm unplugged. But then I do plug in to my phone or social media to actually create and edit that video. But I think that is a fun a fun hobby. And then the last one was to start a podcast. If you like to talk to yourself, super easy to start a podcast, one that you can do anywhere. I love this time. I cherish this time. Sometimes it's hard to think of ideas, but I just try to have like an ongoing list of like, well, what could I talk about today? What do I want to share today? And I think removing the expectation to be perfect and to talk perfectly. As you're listening, I'm going to pronounce things wrong. I pronounce a lot of things wrong, which is actually something I don't like about myself, because I think it makes me sound very uneducated, and that is something that makes me very self-conscious, in full transparency. But I know I also stumble over my words, and I know when I was starting out, I would pause and start recording, pause, start recording again, because I would notice I would say so or but like all the time. And I think, or even like me swallowing, like me making a sound, like I don't edit that out anymore, because I really just think people want to feel comforted when they listen to a podcast. At least I know I do. And I don't want to listen to somebody who feels very stiff and they talk very perfectly and always say the right thing. I really just try to talk how I would talk if I was sitting down with a friend, which you are. I hope you know that. If we don't personally know each other, please don't hesitate to reach out, because I want this to feel like a community. I want it to feel supportive. I want you yourself to feel supported by me. So I know there's so many people that listen to the podcast that I don't personally know that I would love to personally know. So I just wanted to put that out there. But again, starting a podcast and removing the pressure, even like now I've been recording for 51 minutes and it feels like I just sat down. Like it's something I love to do. It's a passion of mine, and there's a lot less pressure than there used to be, which I think just makes this even better. And I guess from a listening perspective, I would rather listen to somebody who just talks rather than tries to always sound perfect or always, like I was saying, do the right thing or not repeat themselves, which I probably repeat myself a lot. But you're here, you're along for the ride. I appreciate you. And if you start a podcast, let me know, because I would love to help you get it started if you have any questions, or I would love to listen. So kind of a side note, but we're going to wrap this up with how you can engage in a hobby that also allows you to enjoy your own company. So with this one, I really want to start off by saying I used to really hate being by myself when I was in college, especially my sophomore year. I lived with 3 other girls, and so there was 4 of us in a room. I was never ever by myself, and I really did enjoy that. I would say I'm an introvert who can act like an extrovert if I need to. And for a long time, I tried to be an extrovert, and it was very exhausting until you finally get comfortable being around people all the time, and you learn that that's not always expected of you. But it meant that when I was by myself, I hated being by myself. I noticed I would be listening to music or a podcast all the time because I hated to be in my own thoughts. I didn't like being by myself. So for me, this looked like finding hobbies that were physically demanding or made me be active and not have my phone with me. That's a really big pattern for me. And this is something I have to admit, like until we moved downtown, I got married, we moved downtown, I walked a lot. And walking was probably my biggest hobby. I would go on an 1.5 to 2 hour walks most days, or I would go for an hour and then in the evening go for another hour with my husband, Nate. Like that was my thing. I did that all the time. Same when we moved to a different area of Omaha. We had a walking trail behind us. Like that was how I disconnected. That was how I spent time by myself, is I went for a walk, and I went for a disconnected walk. And that did so many good things for my mental health. If I wouldn't have had that time, I would think I would have really struggled because I wasn't close to family, like my family, my side of my family. And so it was a hard time, and I definitely went through it in that season of life. But walking was a great way for me to just disconnect. And again, fully disconnecting. Like, don't feel like you have to take your phone with you, or if you do have it, turn it on airplane mode. Like, get out of whatever environment is maybe causing you overwhelm or stress and get some fresh air. But now, even when I live with my husband and we live on a farm and I can get outside, when I do hobbies for myself inside, this is what I like to do. This is kind of how I go about things. Usually on Thursdays, Nate is not around till later in the evening because he goes to Omaha for work. And so I really just savor that time, even though in the past it probably would have stressed me out to be by myself. Now I just enjoy it. So I'll dim the lights, I'll light some candles, I'll turn on some music that has no words. Words for some reason just really stress me out. So it's wordless music. I'll make a really good supper, or I'll be making something unique. So like, I don't know, some sort of dessert or homemade ice cream or something that just is a very like therapeutic thing for me to do. I'll also then like take a long warm shower and get ready for bed and get in comfortable clothes, or I'll let myself just like unwind by dancing in the kitchen while I'm baking. Okay, sorry, pause. Luna's going absolutely insane. Actually appreciating and just like savoring that time that I have by myself, because it's not something that I have very frequently. If you're on the opposite end of that, of course, and you're always by yourself, find a way to plug in and connect with other people, connect with community. That's just how I personally enjoy spending time by myself. I make it an experience. I talk about that a lot with coaching, is if you're making a recipe or if you're going for a walk or exercising, like make it a full experience. Like, we're living life, and when you really break it down, all the things that are causing us stress probably shouldn't be causing us stress. Not saying there's no weight or validity to them, but I just think of all the little things that I worry about all day long. And then if I think about it and really think about it, and I think about my purpose on earth and why I'm here, I really believe my purpose is to love other people and to truly make them feel special. And the things outside of that cause me stress, it's like, why? Like, why do I put so much weight on those things? And so, finding the Nourish with Purpose podcast kind of makes sense to talk about your purpose, finding what that purpose is, and also evaluating like, okay, what is my purpose? Is my purpose to get perfect grades and get a 3.99 GPA and to make the most money ever and to whatever? All those little things that I think we carry, or we put a lot of weight on them. I notice when I take a step back and I think about my actual purpose that's not linked to a job or a level of performance or how good I am at something, I start to realize that my hobby aligns a lot more with my purpose than my occupation maybe even does. And for me, luckily, I'm in an occupation that I feel like aligns really well with my purpose, but not for, that's not the case for everyone. And I understand having a job to make money to support whatever hobby it is you want to pursue. But I think it's really interesting too, when we think about what we're drawn to and what hobbies we're drawn to, it usually aligns really closely with what our deep desire and our deep purpose for ourselves and what we feel our purpose is. And so I just think that's a really cool thing for you to reflect on, especially as you're listening to this episode. You're maybe having some ideas flowing in your mind of like, okay, I really love doing this. Okay, I believe my purpose is this. Like, what hobby could I do that aligns with that purpose? Not to, again, make you feel like all your purpose has to go into a hobby, but you might notice that it aligns really, really closely, which is why it feels like a breath of fresh air when you actually do it. So I know this episode left you with a lot to think about, probably. I hope, again, I say this at the end of every episode, but that you're leaving feeling encouraged and inspired, not overwhelmed and confused. I just never want that to be the case. This podcast is a great space for me to relieve stress and to connect with other people, and I hope that you feel the same way while you're listening. So with that, let's go ahead and close today's episode in prayer. So dear Lord, just thank you for today. Thank you for the rain that you sent our way. Thank you for the new life that's happening around us, the babies being born, the animals being born, the plants growing, the flowers blooming, all of those signs that you are so good and that you care so, so much about us, that you care so much about our environment. And I just ask for guidance with anyone listening to this episode, that they really find that time to commit to an activity that is going to cause them less stress, that's going to allow them to unwind. It'll allow them to find joy and align with that purpose that you have uniquely placed on their heart. I just ask that they feel that sense of passion when they do this hobby, and that they really just feel so inspired leaving this conversation. Thank you again for all that you do for us, for the highs and the lows. Thank you for being there with us through them all. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so if you're interested in following along with my life outside of the podcast, you can find me at Nourish with Bailey on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Lemon8, or if you want to connect with me to talk about what one-on-one coaching would look like, or my hybrid coaching program, or if you just have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me through my website, which is www.findyourdivinepurpose.com. I always love to connect with you. Again, never hesitate to reach out. And with that, I will talk to you again next Wednesday. Bye.